When my husband passed, I told my daughter, "This house will always be yours too." I meant it, from the heart. So when she and her husband asked to move in after they had their first baby, I didn't think twice. I cleared out my sewing room for the nursery, gave them the master bedroom, and told myself this was what love looked like, giving without keeping score. But love changes when respect fades. Slowly my kitchen became their kitchen, my living room, their space. I started knocking on doors in the house I built. I find my granddaughter's toys where my memories used to be, and when my daughter called it their home, something inside me broke, quietly but deeply. I thought I'd lost everything I built for them. Turns out what I really found was a way to take it back. When you live somewhere long enough, the walls start to remember you. The sound of your footsteps, the way the light hits the kitchen table in the morning, even the creak in the floorboard that lets you know you're home. For me, that place was our old Craftsman house in Oregon, a 2-story with chipped paint on the porch and a front yard where the grass never seemed to grow right under the oak tree. My husband Paul and I bought it 40 years ago when we were barely out of our 20s. We didn't have much, just a small savings and a lot of hope. But when we stepped into that house for the first time, with its slanted floors and stubborn windows, I remember thinking, this is where our life will happen. And it did. Every corner of that home carries a piece of us. The oak tree out front started as a sapling we planted the week Emily was born. She used to play under it in the summers, covered in mud and laughter, while Paul built her a swing out of an old tire and some rope he found in the shed. The squeaky stair near the landing was always the one she'd try to skip over when she was sneaking in after curfew. And I'd wait in the living room pretending not to hear. That house, its worn wood and faded paint, wasn't perfect, but it was ours. It held our joys, our losses, our life. After Paul passed, the quiet in that home settled heavy. There were days when I'd hear his voice in the hum of the fridge or swear I saw him in the garden, turning the soil the way he always did. Slow and careful. I kept everything just as it was, his favorite chair by the window, his mug hanging from the same hook, even his old flannel jacket on the coat rack. People told me I should get rid of things, move on, as if grief were a project to be completed. But I couldn't. That house wasn't just walls. It was the last place where we were all together. Then one day, my daughter Emily called. She sounded tired, worn down in a way I hadn't heard before. "Mom," she said, "we're having a rough patch." Her husband Brian had been laid off from his job at the auto shop, and she'd cut her hours at the clinic after their little girl Sophie was born. Rent was high, money was tight, and she didn't want to burden me, as she put it. But I could hear the hesitation in her voice, the pride, the exhaustion. I didn't let her finish. "Come home," I said. "You and Brian. Bring Sophie. The house is big enough for all of us." There was a pause on the line and then a shaky laugh. "Are you sure, Mom?" she asked. "You finally got the place to yourself." "Sweetheart," I said, "this house has too many rooms for one person. It's about time it's filled with life again." It felt good to say that, like I was being useful again, needed again. After all, family helps family. That's how it's supposed to be. The day they arrived, it was raining. Soft Oregon rain, the kind that smells like pine and earth. I watched from the porch as Brian carried boxes from their truck, one after another, until he was soaked through. Emily followed behind him, balancing Sophie on her hip and calling out, "Careful with that one. It's her crib." I felt a small flicker of joy seeing them there, filling up the empty spaces with sound and movement again. The house seemed to breathe differently that day, like it was waking up from a long nap. We spent the afternoon unpacking. I made soup while Emily organized the nursery in what used to be my sewing room. Brian fixed the hallway light that had been flickering for months. It was comforting, like old times when Paul and I would spend weekends tinkering, repainting, mending what needed love. That night, after Sophie was asleep, we sat around the kitchen table drinking tea, the rain still tapping against the windows. "Mom," Emily said, "thank you for this. We'll help with everything. Bills, groceries, repairs. You won't have to worry." I smiled. "You just focus on that little girl," I said. "The rest will work itself out." And for a while, laughter came back into the house. Mornings smelled like coffee and baby powder. Evenings filled with small sounds. Brian watching the game in the living room, Emily humming while she folded laundry, Sophie babbling in her playpen. I'd sit in my chair by the window and think how lucky I was. Not everyone gets to have their family under one roof again. There were little moments that made my heart swell. Watching Emily teach Sophie to crawl across the same wooden floor, she once learned to walk on, hearing Brian whistle as he mowed the lawn just like Paul used to. Sometimes I'd catch myself smiling at nothing, just grateful that the home was alive again. But as the weeks turned into months, I started to notice small shifts. The kind you only see when you're paying attention. My favorite kitchen mug went missing. A few of my cookbooks were packed away to make room for the baby's things. I told myself not to mind. It was just clutter anyway. When I came downstairs one morning and found the furniture rearranged, Emily laughed and said, "Mom, it's more open this way. Don't you love it?" I didn't, not really. But I said yes, because I wanted her to feel at home. Still, something in me ached, not in a dramatic way, just that quiet, familiar ache you get when something one's years slowly becomes something else. The smell of baby shampoo filled the bathroom where Paul used to keep his shaving kit. The guest room became Brian's office. The sound of Sophie crying at 2 a.m. replaced the stillness I'd grown used to. It wasn't bad, not exactly. It was life. But it was different, and sometimes late at night I'd lie awake wondering when the house had started to feel less like mine. One afternoon I found Emily sitting in the living room, Sophie asleep in her lap. She looked tired but happy. "Mom," she said, "you don't mind if Brian paints the kitchen, do you? He thinks a brighter color would make it feel more modern." "Oh," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "I suppose that'd be fine." She smiled and said, "You're the best," before heading upstairs. I looked around that living room, at the curtains Paul had hung, the old family photos lining the mantel, and I realized that every time I said yes to something, a small piece of the past slipped away. I wasn't angry, not even resentful. I just felt invisible, like I was fading from the home I had built, one yes at a time. But I told myself it was fine. It was family. You don't put rules on love. That night, as I rocked Sophie to sleep, she reached out and touched my face. Her little fingers brushed the corner of my eye, and I felt tears slip down before I could stop them. Maybe it was just the weight of years, or maybe it was the quiet truth settling in. I wasn't just giving them a place to stay, I was giving up my place in it. Still, when Emily and Brian thanked me the next morning, I smiled and said, "You're welcome, sweetheart," because that's what mothers do. We give. But as I stood in the doorway watching them laugh together in my kitchen, I felt something stir inside me. Not anger, not regret, just a small, sharp flicker of awareness, like the first breeze before a storm. This house was built on memories, on love that asked for nothing in return. I had kept it standing through every season, every heartbreak, every loss, and though I didn't know it yet, I was about to learn that even love, especially love, needs boundaries to survive. Because the moment you start knocking on your own doors, you realize just how much you've given away. And somewhere deep down I knew that part of the story wasn't finished yet. And started with little things, so small at first that I told myself I was imagining it. Emily had always liked rearranging things. When she was younger, she used to move her bedroom furniture around at least twice a year. She said it made her feel like she was starting fresh. I remember walking into her room once to find her bed pushed against the window, sunlight spilling across her face as she smiled and said, "Doesn't it feel bigger now, Mom?" She had that same spark in her eyes when she stood in my living room one morning, hands on her hips, studying the space like she was seeing it for the first time. "Mom," she said, "if we move the sofa against this wall, we'll have more space for Sophie's playpen." I smiled, even though something in me hesitated. "Whatever you think works best," I told her. She clapped her hands lightly. "Perfect. You'll see. It'll look so much more open." And she was right in a way. The room did feel bigger after she moved things around. But it also felt unfamiliar. My chair by the window, the one where I'd sat with my morning coffee for years, ended up in a corner facing the wall. My little reading lamp disappeared. I found it later, tucked in the basement next to a box of Christmas decorations. Still, I brushed it off. Change was good, I told myself. A little freshness. A little life. The next week, Brian replaced my old coffee pot. It was a sturdy, chipped little thing Paul and I bought back when money was tight, but it made the best cup of coffee I ever had. I came downstairs one morning, half asleep, to find a sleek, silver machine sitting on the counter instead. "Morning, Mom," Brian said cheerfully. "I upgraded your setup. This one grinds the beans fresh." "Oh," I said softly, trying to hide my surprise. "Well, thank you." He smiled and turned back to his phone, already lost in something else. That first cup tasted fine, I suppose. But it wasn't the same. The smell, the sound of the old pot bubbling, those small rituals that start your day, they were gone. I know it sounds silly, missing an old coffee pot, but when you live long enough in one place, even the smallest things become part of who you are. They hold memory, like old friends that never leave you. More things started shifting after that. My lace curtains disappeared one morning, replaced by sleek beige blinds. The floral rug I'd picked with Paul was rolled up and moved to the attic, to keep it safe from the baby. Every change was explained with kindness, practicality, and that smile Emily had, sweet but firm. "Mom, you've had these things forever," she said one afternoon, dusting the new glass coffee table. "Don't you want the place to feel more modern?" I didn't answer right away. I looked around at the space that had once been ours, mine and Paul's, the soft tones, the cozy clutter, the feeling that everything in it had a story. Now it looked like a page out of a furniture catalog, clean, organized, and somehow hollow. "Well," I finally said, "as long as you're happy." She smiled. "We're all happy, Mom, but I wasn't sure I was part of Lee anymore." A few days later, I noticed my wedding photo was missing from the hallway. It had hung there for decades, Paul in his dark suit, me in a simple white dress, holding daisies instead of roses, because that's what we could afford. I ran my hand along the wall where it used to be, leaving a faint mark in the dust. In its place was a large canvas print, Emily, Brian, and little Sophie at the pumpkin patch, smiling. Perfect. For a long moment I just stood there, staring at it. It wasn't anger I felt, more like a quiet ache, something deep in my chest that spread slowly. That photo of Paul and me had been the first thing people saw when they came in the door. Now, it was as if we'd never lived here at all. When I asked about it later, Emily looked surprised. "Oh, that old picture. Mom, I didn't think you'd mind. I wanted something more up-to-date for the hallway." I wanted to tell her I did mind, that every time she replaced something old, she erased another piece of my life, but the words got caught in my throat. Instead, I smiled tightly and said, "Of course, honey, whatever makes you happy." She hugged me then, her arms warm but brief. "You're the best," she said, before rushing off to feed Sophie. That night I sat in the living room after everyone went to bed. The new blinds were closed, the silver coffee pot gleamed under the kitchen light, and the air felt too still. I thought about how fast things can change without anyone meaning to hurt you. It wasn't cruelty, it was just life moving forward, and me standing still. But standing still doesn't mean you stop feeling. A few weeks later, I came home from the grocery store to find my old china packed in boxes. I froze in the doorway. "Mom," Emily called from the dining room, cheerful as ever. "We're just making space for the new dishes Brian's mom gave us. Don't worry, I'll keep yours in storage." She smiled like she was doing me a favor, and maybe she thought she was. But seeing those dishes, ones Paul and I bought for our 10th anniversary, the same ones we used every Thanksgiving, stuffed into cardboard boxes, felt like watching the past being sealed away. I didn't say anything. I just nodded and carried the groceries to the kitchen. My hands trembled as I unpacked them. That evening, I sat alone in the sunroom while the others ate dinner in the dining room. I could hear laughter through the door, Brian's voice booming, Emily's softer one, Sophie's high little giggle. It was warm, full of life, the kind of sound I used to love. But now it felt like I was listening to someone else's family. I didn't want to resent them. God knows I raised Emily to be independent, to build a life of her own. But I hadn't realized that in doing so, she might forget where that strength came from. I thought about saying something, setting a few boundaries, maybe taking back a room, or two, but then I'd see Sophie's little face light up when she saw me, or Emily's tired eyes soften after a long day, and I'd let it go. It's not worth the fuss, I told myself. It's just stuff. But it wasn't just stuff. One morning, I walked downstairs and heard Emily on the phone. Her voice was light, happy. "Yeah, we're settling in great," she said, laughing softly. "It finally feels like our home." I froze. Our home. It was such a small phrase, but it hit me like a thunderclap. Not Mom's house, not the place where I grew up. Our home. The air in the room shifted just like that. I stood at the foot of the stairs, heart thudding quietly in my chest. The house felt suddenly smaller, like the walls were pressing in. I wanted to tell her that this home was built long before she was old enough to hold a hammer, that every board, every nail, every scratch on the wall told a story she hadn't lived. But I didn't. I just turned around and went back. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of my bed and looked out the window at the oak tree Paul and I planted all those years ago. Its branches had grown thick and strong, stretching over the yard where Sophie now played. I thought about how roots run deep, unseen beneath the soil. They hold the weight of storms, even when the branches bend. Maybe I'd been bending too long. I traced the outline of the old photo of Paul and me that I'd moved to my bedside table. His smile looked softer than I remembered. "I don't know what's happening," I whispered to him, "but it feels like I'm disappearing." The wind outside rustled the leaves, and for a moment it sounded like his voice again. Steady, patient. "You'll know what to do, Joni. Just give it time." And maybe that was the truth of it. Time is a way of showing what love really looks like, when it's strong enough to stand, and when it's starting to fade. That night, as I turned off the light, I promised myself something. I wouldn't fight, I wouldn't shout, but I'd start paying attention, because love can build a home, but it can also lose its way if you're not careful. And somehow, deep in my chest, I felt it. Something was shifting, not just in the house, but in me. It's strange how quietly a person can disappear from their own life. There's no grand moment, no announcement, just small, ordinary things that start to change when you're not paying attention. At first I didn't even notice. I still woke up early every morning, made my coffee, fed the birds out back, and watched the sunlight crawl over the kitchen tiles. The rhythm was familiar, comforting, but over time, those little pieces of my routine started slipping away, replaced by other people's habits. One morning I came downstairs to find the thermostat blinking. The temperature set 10 degrees higher than usual. The air felt heavy and stale. I turned it down without thinking, but that evening it was back up again. Then it happened the next day, and the next. Finally, I asked Emily, "Sweetheart, did you change the thermostat?" She smiled. That sweet, patient smile people use when they think they're helping you. "Oh, Mom, the house gets chilly for Sophie. You probably don't notice because you're always wrapped in those shawls." She said it kindly, but it stung. I wanted to tell her I wasn't always wrapped in shawls, that I liked the crisp air, the way it felt alive, like the house was breathing with me. But instead, I nodded and said, "Of course, honey, whatever's best for the baby." That's how it always started, whatever's best for the baby. The next thing was the mail. I've always loved mail, real mail, the kind that comes in envelopes with stamps, bills, catalogs, the occasional letter from an old friend. Every morning, I'd walk out to the box, feel the cold metal under my fingers, and flip through the envelopes before heading inside. But one day there was nothing. The next day, nothing again. After 3 days, I found a small stack sitting in the garage, half opened, with Brian's handwriting scrawled across the top. Mong's stuff. When I asked about it, he waved his hand. "Oh, I've been bringing it in with ours. Didn't want to clutter the counter." Clutter. My mail was clutter now. I smiled politely and took the pile upstairs, even though I could feel the heat rising in my chest. It wasn't about the mail, it was about being seen, about someone remembering that I still existed in this house, that I still had a life, even if it moved a little slower than theirs. But the clearest sign came one evening after dinner. I'd made chicken stew, my husband's favorite recipe, the one Emily used to ask for every winter. The smell filled the house, rich and comforting. But when I called everyone to the table, they didn't come right away. I heard laughter from the den, the sound of the TV turned up loud, and Emily's voice saying, "We'll eat later, Mom. Sophie's still up." So I sat at the table alone. The stew cooled, and the house, once full of family and warmth, felt like a hotel lobby. Familiar, but not mine. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I stood in the kitchen and looked around. My apron hung where it always had, but the counters were covered in new appliances, gadgets I'd never bought, dishes I'd never chosen. Even the smell was different now, not stew or coffee, but baby formula and laundry detergent. The soft hum of the dishwasher filled the silence, where laughter used to live. That's when it really hit me. I was becoming invisible in my own home. The next few weeks passed like that, me tiptoeing around their routines, trying not to be in the way. If I watched TV, I kept the volume low. If I cooked, I used the back burner, so Emily could make something else if she needed to. When guests came over, her friends mostly, I'd excuse myself early, and retreat to the guest room. One night I was walking down the hallway with a load of laundry when I heard her voice through the half-open door of the nursery. She was on the phone, laughing softly. "Yeah, Mom's comfortable here," she said. "She doesn't need much space. She's happy just having us around." I stopped. It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. cheerful, confident, like it was true. Like I was a piece of furniture that had found its corner. I didn't move for a long moment. I just stood there, clutching that basket of laundry, listening to the sound of her voice fade under Sophie's baby babble. My arms felt heavy, my throat tight. After she hung up, I went back to my room. Not my bedroom, not our bedroom, but the guest room. Funny how language changes before you even notice it. The bed was smaller, the light colder, the walls bare. My things had been moved in bit by bit, a few clothes in the closet, a photo or two on the nightstand. But it didn't feel like mine. It felt like I was borrowing space in someone else's house. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the old photo of Paul and me. The frame was scratched now, maybe from all the times I'd packed it and unpacked it, holding on to something familiar while everything else shifted. "Did we do too good a job raising her?" I whispered. "Did we teach her to be so independent she forgot where she came from?" The question hung in the air. No one to answer it but me. That night I couldn't sleep. The sounds of the house, the TV murmuring from downstairs, the baby monitor crackling faintly, all reminded me that life was happening beyond my door, but not with me in it. I used to feel the heartbeat of this house, the way it lived with me. Now it pulsed around me, indifferent. I tried reading, but the words wouldn't stay still. I tried knitting, but my hands shook too much. So I sat there, in the soft glow of the bedside lamp, and let the memories come. I remember the first time Paul and I painted this room. He'd splattered paint on the carpet by accident and laughed so hard he had to sit down. I remembered Emily, 5 years old, running in circles while we tried to hang curtains. I remember feeling safe in this house, like no matter what life threw at us, this place would hold. But now it held something else, a silence that didn't comfort. Around midnight I heard the creak of the stairs. For a moment I thought maybe Emily would knock. Maybe she'd come to talk, to say she didn't mean it that way. But the steps went past my door, down the hall, into the nursery. A few minutes later the baby monitor went quiet, and the house sank back into stillness. That was when it hit me, the realization that cut through the fog of hurt and confusion. I wasn't part of this home anymore. Not really. I was in it, but not of it. It wasn't just the mail or the thermostat or the missing photo. It was the feeling of being tolerated, not needed, the subtle shift from mother to houseguest, from someone who built the foundation to someone quietly standing on the sidelines, watching the walls close in. And for the first time since Paul passed, I felt something other than grief. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something smaller but sharper, a flicker of resolve buried deep in the quiet. Because as much as it hurt, I knew one thing for sure. This was still my home. My name was on the deed, my sweat in the wood, my memories in the paint. And if love had taught me to share, it had also taught me something else. That there's a point where giving turns into losing. That night, I sat by the window, watching the oak tree sway in the moonlight. The leaves shimmered, whispering softly against the glass. It was strange. I almost felt like Paul was out there again, tending to it like he used to. I could see his old flannel jacket in my mind, the way he'd look up and grin when he caught me watching him. "I don't know what to do," I whispered. "But I can't keep living like a ghost." The words felt heavy and real as they left my mouth. And in that quiet moment, something inside me shifted. The grief, the hurt, the endless excuses, they all started to settle into something steadier, something I could build from. Because maybe, just maybe, love wasn't about giving everything away. Maybe it was about learning when to take something back. I didn't know what that meant yet, or what it would look like. But I knew this. I wasn't done, not with this house, not with myself, and not with the life I'd built brick by brick, one that was still in every way that mattered mine. After the nights I'd spent listening to the house breathe without me, I started spending more afternoons downtown. It wasn't that I was running away, it was more like stepping into a small pocket of the world where my own voice could come back. I'd walk through the little farmer's market on Tuesdays, linger over the books at the secondhand store, or sit with a cup of tea at the corner cafe and watch people go about their days. The shop owners knew me by name now. Mrs. Alvarez would call out, "Joan, your usual," and I'd feel for a moment like I belonged somewhere again. One rainy Thursday, as I sat nursing that same cup of tea, an advertisement on the community board caught my eye. It was for a local realtor, Martha Hargrove, who specialized in helping older homeowners find flexible options. Shared rentals, legal partitions, downsizing without leaving the neighborhood. I folded the flyer into my purse and forgot about it until the following week, when I saw the same name in small print on a for rent sign across from the post office. Sometimes the universe nudges twice. Called the number without thinking too much about it. Martha's voice was steady and kind. Someone who sounded like she'd handle complicated things with patience and respect. We met for coffee the next morning in a quiet part of town where the light came soft through old sycamore trees. She was shorter than I imagined, with silver hair and a porch swing laugh that made me relax before I'd even explain myself. "I don't want to move," I said, because I wanted her to know that right away. I didn't want pity or the small talk that comes with it. I wanted options. Martha listened the way people used to, when they needed to understand, not to interrupt. "You don't have to," she said. "There are other ways to create space, Joan. Legal ones. Ones that protect both your home and your independence." She pulled a small stack of papers from her bag and laid them on the table like she was opening a map. There were diagrams, simple explanations, and pictures of houses that looked as if they'd been loved for decades. She spoke about accessory dwelling units and house partitioning, about how you could legally section off a part of a home to rent, or to have a tenant share utilities, while keeping the main ownership and control. She explained things slowly, and without the jargon that usually makes legal talk feel like a foreign language. "You can stay," she said, tapping the map with a neat finger. "You can keep the rooms you love. You can create a private legal space for someone else. And the codes protect you. It gives you income, companionship if you choose it, and boundaries in a way that's recognized by law. It isn't about giving up. It's about choosing how to live." Her words felt strange and hopeful all at once. I thought about Paul and the way he'd hammered the birdhouse of our marriage together with patience. I thought about that oak tree in the yard and how we had planted it, hoping the roots would bind them all, us and our daughter, together. This was different. This was not surrender. This was a way of making rules for the present that honored the past. I told Martha everything. No, not everything. I told her enough. I did not bring up my pride, or the way my chest felt hollow some nights. I did not tell her about the thermostat, or the kitchen being rearranged, or the framed wedding photo that had gone missing. I let myself say, simply, "I want to stay. I just need to feel like this home is still mine." She nodded, as if she'd heard that before. "We'll do it quietly," she said. "We'll make a plan that respects your place here. You don't have to tell anyone until you're ready." The phrase, "quietly," was exactly what I needed. Not because I wanted to be secretive, but because I no longer trusted conversations that started with, "Mom, we thought," and ended with me agreeing before I knew what I'd given away. Over the next month, I met with Martha twice more. We walked through the house together one morning, shoes on the mat, the sunlight falling across the same floorboards I'd polished 1,000 times. She took measurements, pointed out entrances that could be reconfigured, and suggested where a private kitchen might fit without disturbing the flow of the family's life. She talked about safety rails and separate meters, about how local ordinances encouraged sensible shared use for older homes. Every time she spoke, a plan unfurled in my mind like a pattern I'd known to sew. Martha gave me names of contractors who'd done similar work, carpenters who cared about preserving old moldings, electricians who respected history, and a list of lawyers who could draft a tiny but ironclad agreement that would protect me. "You'll sign the papers, Joan," she said. "Everything will be in writing. If you ever feel uncomfortable, the law will back you up. It's your choice." Choice. The word felt soft and powerful. I'd always thought of choice in grand gestures: leave, move, scream, or forgive. But Martha's idea of choice was quiet, structured, practical, and entirely mine. I did what any woman of my generation would do when faced with a plan that made sense. I made lists. I sat at my little kitchen table with a notepad and a pencil, writing down the things I wanted to keep and the rooms that mattered more than others. My sewing room, the front parlor where Paul used to sit, the small nook by the kitchen window where I liked to sew. I circled them like I was protecting names in a ledger. Filing the paperwork felt less like public declaration and more like tucking a letter into a safe drawer. I signed forms with a hand that trembled slightly, my signature underlined with a thin line of determination. The lawyer Martha recommended, Mr. Riley, was a gentle man who understood both property law and the soft edges of human life. He explained the agreement in plain sentences, and when I asked questions, he answered without making me feel foolish. "You won't lose the house," he said quietly, as if that were a worry he understood intimately. You'll be defining how it works from now on. He pointed out clauses that reserved my private parking space and required any tenant to respect shared spaces. He mentioned that the lease could include a clause requiring 30 days' notice for changes, a small but meaningful protection against the kind of overnight shifts that had begun to unsettle me. The contracts made me feel as if someone had finally nailed down a loose shingle. While all this was happening, I didn't say much at home. I didn't announce meetings or tell them I was meeting with a realtor. I watched Emily stack dishes and Brian rearrange the porch chairs, and I nodded and smiled when Emily said, "Isn't this great? The place feels more modern." I kept the plan tucked in my purse like a secret herb, releasing its scent only when I needed courage. There were practical things to sort out: permits, contractor estimates, and little annoyances like garbage service adjustments. Martha guided me through each step with the composed patience of someone who'd helped other people reclaim their lives without drama. She encouraged me to interview potential tenants carefully. "Pick someone who will complement your life, not complicate it," she advised. I liked the idea of a tenant who would water the back garden and offer to fetch me a loaf of bread now and then, a quiet companion rather than a roommate. When the contractor suggested moving the back door lock to a separate latch for the new partition, I caught my breath. "Will people notice?" I asked him. "Maybe," he said, "but it's common, and it gives you control. You can keep your schedule, your privacy. The lock is about safety and boundaries. That's a good thing." I thought about how many times I'd opened my door to fix a light, a leak, or a tantrum, feeling obliged because family had lived in the same rooms. I thought about how often my explanations began before I'd fully formed them. I did it because... I let it happen because... I was tired of justifying my life. The lock represented something simple and profound, a small physical way to say, "This is mine too." Finally, the day came when the contractor finished the small work. The new latch, a trim doorway, a fresh coat of paint that matched the old trim. The paperwork was signed and notarized. The lease was drafted with my name on top. We found a tenant, Linda, a retired schoolteacher, who wanted a quiet place with a garden. She had soft hands and easy manners, and the first time we met she handed me a loaf of homemade bread like an offering of neighborliness. I didn't make an announcement. I didn't need to. I woke the morning the new lock was fitted, and made my coffee the way I always had, but with a small steadiness I hadn't felt in months. The house hummed with its usual sounds, Emily's footsteps, Sophie's little squeals, but underneath it was a different rhythm, one that included the knowledge that the house was legally, unmistakably still mine. Weeks later, when Linda arrived with her small suitcase and a polite smile, I showed her the little nook she'd claim and the shared spaces we respect. She thanked me for the succulent plant on the windowsill and promised to water it like she'd always watered her class plants. There was a gentleness to her that made my step lighter. When Emily came home and saw the new lock on the back door, she furrowed her brow, curiosity and a flicker of impatience crossing her face. "Mom," she said, "what's that for?" Her voice was careful, the way it is when someone finally notices a change. You expected them to notice without asking. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for a second, it felt as if the whole house inhaled. I could have told her everything then, the meetings, the forms, Martha's diagrams, and the way Mr. Riley had underlined the clause about 30 days' notice. I could have explained how I'd been quietly building a way to remain part of my life here without being pushed to the edges. Instead, I smiled. Not the small smile I'd practiced to keep things easy, but a quiet, full one. "I thought it was time to make a few things official," I said simply. "We'll talk about the details later." There was no defensiveness in my voice, no apology. It was a statement, not a question. Emily opened her mouth, perhaps to protest, perhaps to demand an explanation, but the look on her face softened. Maybe she saw in me then something that wasn't the woman who smoothed a wrinkled shirt or found a lost sock. Maybe she saw a person who had carved out a line in the sand and was standing behind it. She didn't say anything else. She walked past the door and sat at the table, her shoulders a little slumped, the noise of the house swallowing up the small surprise. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to justify my choices. I had made a quiet decision, one that was legal and sensible, and most importantly mine. The house still held their laughter and their needs, but it also held the fact that I could choose my life within it. I watered the plant Linda had left behind, and I felt something like relief bloom in my chest. Weeks later, a new door lock appeared, and for once, when someone noticed, Joan did not explain it. When Linda moved in, it was as if the air inside the house remembered how to breathe again. She came on a Thursday morning with 2 neat suitcases and a stack of books tied with twine. There was no fuss, no noise, just the quiet shuffle of boxes and the warm smell of her lavender soap drifting down the hall. I helped her settle in, showed her the kitchen corner that would be hers, the small sitting room that caught the morning light, and the back door that led to the garden. She looked around with soft, appreciative eyes and said, "You have a lovely home, Joan." It had been a long time since anyone said that like they meant it. After she unpacked, we shared coffee at the small table by the window. She told me about her years teaching middle school English, how she'd spent 3 decades trying to make children fall in love with words, and how quiet retirement had felt lonelier than she'd expected. "You start to miss the noise," she said with a laugh, "even the kind that used to drive you crazy." I smiled because I knew that kind of quiet, the one that makes the walls hum. Linda's presence changed things. Not loudly, but steadily. There was something soothing about her rhythm. She rose early like I did, humming faintly as she boiled water for tea. She wore soft cardigans that smelled faintly of soap and peppermint, and her laughter, when it came, was like the creak of an old door swinging open again after years of being stuck. At first, Emily didn't say much. She raised her eyebrows when I introduced Linda as a tenant and a friend, but she forced a smile. "That's different," she said, her tone caught somewhere between polite and puzzled. "Yes," I replied, pouring coffee. "It is different, but good." It was the first time in a long while I'd said something about my own choices that didn't tremble on its way out of my mouth. A few days later, small changes started to ripple through the house. Linda's soft music drifted through the back rooms, not loud enough to disturb, just enough to remind the air that it could hold joy again. Sometimes she'd hum along, and the sound felt like sunlight brushing across the floorboards. One evening, I found her in the garden, pruning the old rosebush Paul had planted years ago. She turned to me with dirt on her gloves and said, "These poor things just needed a little attention." Funny, I thought. That's all I'd needed, too. We started sharing small rituals. Afternoon tea on the porch, watering plants together in companionable silence. Once she brought over a blueberry pie and said, "It's too much for one person, and too good not to share." It wasn't just kindness, it was presence, a gentle acknowledgement that I existed. For the first time in months, I found myself waking up looking forward to the day, to conversation, to company that didn't drain me. The house felt alive again, like it was exhaling after holding its breath for too long. The clinking of dishes, the creak of footsteps, the soft chatter of 2 women who had seen enough life to understand the value of peace. It all blended into something that felt like home again. But not everyone saw it that way. It took less than 2 weeks for Emily to notice the difference. She came into the kitchen one afternoon, her tone careful. "Mom," she began, "Brian and I were wondering, why didn't you tell us about Linda before she moved in?" I looked up from my tea. "I didn't think I needed to," I said calmly. Her lips pressed together. It's strange, having someone else living here." "She's not living with you," I said, keeping my voice even. "She's renting the back section, legally." That word, legally, seemed to unsettle her more than anything else. She blinked, trying to find her footing. "I just thought—" "I know what you thought," I said softly, cutting her off without anger. "But I needed to make a change. I needed to start living again." The silence that followed was heavy, but not cruel. She didn't argue, not this time. Maybe she saw something in me that she hadn't before, not defiance exactly, but certainty. A quiet line drawn in the sand, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. She nodded slowly, a little frown creasing her forehead, and left the kitchen without another word. That night, for the first time in months, I slept soundly. The days that followed settled into a new rhythm. Emily kept to her side more, and I didn't chase her company. The house seemed to divide itself naturally, not with walls or hostility, but with respect. Linda's laughter in the back room mingled with Sophie's giggles from the nursery. 2 different lives under one roof, each allowed to breathe. There was one moment, though, that I'll never forget. I was sitting on the porch, knitting when Brian came home from work. He walked past me, stopped halfway, then turned around. "That new tenant," he said, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp. "She's not causing any issues, is she?" I met his gaze evenly. "Not a single one. She pays on time. She's kind. And she makes the best blueberry pie I've ever tasted." He hesitated, clearly caught off guard by my steadiness. "Just making sure things don't get complicated." "They're simpler than they've been in a long time," I said, smiling. He didn't respond. He just nodded and went inside, the screen door closing behind him. That evening, I could hear Linda's soft radio humming through the back door while I washed the dishes. A song I hadn't heard in years. Blue Moon. Paul and I used to dance to it in this very kitchen. My reflection in the window caught the faintest hint of a smile. For the first time in a long while, I realized I didn't feel small anymore. I didn't feel invisible. I had a space that belonged to me again, not just in name, but in spirit. And the beauty of it was how natural it all felt. Linda never intruded. She just existed gently beside me, a quiet affirmation that life could still grow, even after it had been pruned back. Sometimes we'd talk about our pasts, her years teaching, my time as a nurse, and find comfort in the shared understanding of having given so much of ourselves to others. "It's funny," she said once, "how easy it is to forget we're allowed to start over." "Yes," I said, "it is funny." That line stayed with me for days, because that's what this was. Not rebellion, not revenge. A quiet restart. Emily tried once more to bring it up. She caught me in the kitchen while I was wiping the counter. "Mom," she said carefully, "do you think this setup is really sustainable? Having the stranger living here?" I looked at her, gentle but unyielding. "Linda isn't a stranger anymore," I said, "and this is my home. I'm doing what I need to stay here, and to be happy here." She wanted to protest. I saw it flicker in her eyes, but the words never came. Instead, she sighed and nodded. That was the first time she'd backed down. That night, I watched her through the window as she played with Sophie on the porch. Her laughter was softer, and her tone with me afterward less clipped. Maybe she was starting to see it too, that this wasn't about control. It was about balance. The house began to feel like itself again, not just a shelter, but a living thing that carried the hum of history and the warmth of renewal. The floors creaked the same, the windows let in the same light, but it all sounded different now, freer. Linda's little garden by the back fence began to bloom. Tulips, marigolds, and mint filled the air with scent. Sometimes Sophie toddled over to help her water them, and Linda would laugh, letting her splash a little. I watched from the kitchen window, the sight filling me with something close to peace. I'd once thought that reclaiming control would mean confrontation, harsh words, slammed doors, ultimatums. But it turned out to be something quieter, gentler, and far more powerful. It wasn't about proving Emily wrong. It wasn't even about the house. It was about remembering that I still had choices, that my life, even at 66, wasn't finished or defined by anyone else's comfort. And somehow, everyone began to feel that shift, even if they couldn't name it. The house that had once felt like a battleground now breathed with an even rhythm. The laughter from Linda's side mixed with the sound of dinner being made on Emily's, and in the middle of it all was me, steady, calm, finally belonging in my own home again. One evening, as I locked up the kitchen and turned off the lights, I caught my reflection in the window. My face looked older, sure, but also lighter. There was something in my eyes I hadn't seen in years, peace, maybe, or just the quiet satisfaction of standing where I belonged. The balance had shifted, yes, but not through anger or confrontation. It shifted because I stopped waiting for permission to live. And for the first time in a long, long while, the silence in the house wasn't heavy. Anymore, it was mine. It's been months now. The kind that slipped by softly, marked not by arguments or upheavals, but by the steady hum of peace. The house feels right again. Not perfect, but balanced. The way a home should be when everyone inside finally understands their place, not by who owns what, but by what's respected. Most mornings I wake before the sun. It's a habit I never lost, not even during the years when I felt like a guest in my own life. I still make my coffee the old way, percolator on the stove, 2 spoonfuls of sugar, 1 splash of cream. The smell drifts through the kitchen, mingling with the faint scent of bread from the bakery down the street. I sit by the window as the light starts to come through the curtains. The oak tree in the yard, the one Paul and I planted so many years ago, is taller now, its branches stretching wide and strong. Sometimes I imagine he's still out there, coffee cup in hand, nodding like he used to whenever something in life started making sense again. The house hums differently these days. There's laughter. Yes, Emily's voice. Sophie's little feet running across the hallway, Brian humming along to some old tune while fixing breakfast. But there's something else too. Space. Not the kind that separates people, but the kind that lets them breathe. Linda still lives in the back half, and she's become more than a tenant. She's a friend. On Tuesdays she brings over a small plate of muffins, and we sit out on the porch together, watching the neighborhood stir awake. She tells me stories about her students, and I tell her about the early days of this house, when the paint was still fresh, and life felt like one long summer afternoon. Sometimes she says, "You know, Joan, you did a brave thing." I always smile and shake my head. "No," I tell her, "I just did what needed to be done." But deep down, I know there's truth in her words. It's strange. I used to think power came from being loud, from being right, from standing your ground in plain sight. But what I've learned is that the real kind, the quiet kind, comes from choosing what you'll allow, what you'll protect, and what you'll no longer explain. There's a peace that comes when you stop apologizing for existing. The garden is thriving again. I planted daisies along the fence line this spring, their white petals bright against the green. Sophie loves to help me water them, though she mostly ends up watering her shoes. Emily watches from the porch sometimes, and I can see a different kind of look in her eyes lately, softer, more aware. One afternoon she came down the steps, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and said, "Mom, the garden looks beautiful. You've really brought it back to life." I looked up at her, squinting against the sun. "Thank you," I said. Then, after a beat, I added, "It feels good to take care of something that's mine." She didn't argue. She just nodded. A small gesture, but I saw what it meant. There was understanding there, maybe even a little guilt, though I didn't need it. I wasn't looking for an apology anymore. I just wanted peace, and for once, we both had it. Inside, I've reclaimed small corners of the house, little sanctuaries that feel like me again. The kitchen shelves hold my old teacups, the ones with faded floral patterns. My wedding photo is back on the hallway wall, not as a relic but as a quiet reminder of where love began and how it shaped everything after. Evenings are my favorite now. The light turns golden and the air smells of jasmine from the front yard. I sit on the porch with a blanket and my book, sometimes with Linda beside me, sometimes alone. The world slows down, and for a few minutes everything feels still. Sometimes I can hear Sophie giggling from inside, her little voice echoing through the same walls that once heard Emily's laughter at that age. It's funny how life circles back, not repeating itself but finding its own rhythm again. There's warmth here now, not tension. A gentle understanding. We've found a new kind of family dynamic. Not the one I expected, but maybe the one we all needed. One evening, Emily joined me on the porch. She sat quietly for a while before saying, "I didn't realize how much this house means to you." I looked at her, the lines around her eyes catching the soft light. "You'll understand one day," I said. "When you've built something, not just walls but memories. It's not about owning it. It's about what it holds." She nodded, tears brimming but not falling, and that was enough. I didn't need her to say sorry. Her being there, sitting beside me, sharing the sunset, said it all. Now I live on my own terms. I keep the doors I want open, and the ones I don't, locked. I spend my mornings in the garden. Afternoons reading or baking, my evenings watching the light fade over the same porch. Paul and I once dreamed on. I've learned that reclaiming your life doesn't always mean starting over somewhere new. Sometimes it means staying right where you are, but changing the way you live there. It means remembering that you have the right to draw lines, even if they make others uncomfortable. That protecting your peace isn't selfish. It's survival. Sometimes I think about the woman I was just a year ago, soft-spoken, hesitant, apologizing for her own comfort. I wish I could reach back and tell her that she wasn't weak for wanting harmony. She was just tired of being unheard. Now every day feels quieter, but that quiet hums with strength. This house, this little craftsman home with its creaky floors and old oak front, it doesn't feel like a burden anymore. He feels alive. It breathes again. I walk through the rooms and touch the walls, sometimes, not out of sentiment, but gratitude. These walls have seen me fall apart and rebuild, lose everything, and find it again in new form. They've watched generations grow, argue, forgive, and return. And maybe that's what makes a home. Not who pays for it, or whose name sits on the deed, but the people who choose to live in it with grace and honesty. I used to think I gave everything away, the love, the space, the trust. But I see now that I didn't lose those things. I just let them shift. What I took back, quietly, deliberately, was my right to decide how I live. That's something no one can sign over or replace. I suppose that's the kind of lesson you only won, once you've lived long enough, to stop needing everyone's approval. The kind that doesn't come from anger, but from clarity. Now when I sit by the window in the evenings, the sunlight landing soft on my hands, I feel something close to contentment, not the restless kind that comes and goes, but the deep, grounded kind that stays. This house isn't just mine because my name is on the papers. It's mine because I made it a home again. One choice, one lock, one small act of courage at a time. And maybe that's the point. Sometimes power isn't taken. It's quietly reclaimed. Soft outro music begins, the tone gentle and reflective. If you've ever felt like your voice went quiet in your own life, if you've ever given too much, or been made to feel small in a place you built with love, I hope you remember Joan's story. Because taking your life back doesn't always mean walking away. Sometimes it's just standing still long enough to remember that it was yours all along. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, take a moment to like, share, or subscribe. It helps us bring more stories like this, about strength, family, and quiet justice, to others who might need them. The sound of a soft breeze fades in, sunlight goes across the frame as Joan sits by the window, peaceful, steady, free.